Hey guys, welcome to this free lesson on simplifying rational expressions. Specifically, we're going to talk about something that is a little bit tricky. It's called something I like to call the -1 trick for simplifying. And as a reminder, there are free guided notes always available. So to kick off this idea, my question is, can you simplify x minus 3 over 3 minus x? So just in this current form, can you simplify this? And if you look at this, so you see the x's and the 3's, but they're in opposite placement, right? And they have that minus sign. So this is not the same thing. X minus 3 and 3 minus x, they are not the same thing. So the answer to this would be no, not in its current form. They're just not the same, right? But here's kind of what this lesson is about. We actually can simplify this if we do a little trick. So what I want you to do is I want you to actually follow along with this, and I want you to write down detailed steps. And I think it's a really good practice for something that's this complicated to explain your reasoning, explain the why for this, because this kind of gets confusing for people. So that's a strategy that you always want to use for things that are complicated. Write things down in a way that makes sense to you, like write directions for yourself. Okay, so let's do this. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take x minus 3 over 3 minus x. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to factor out -1 from the bottom. Okay, so let's take a look at what that looks like. So this is going to be x minus 3. So I'm bringing out -1. So this is going to reverse all of the signs here then, right? This will become now -3 plus x. So when you factor out something negative, that should give you all opposite signs. Now what I want to do is I want to reorder inside the parentheses. So just to direct your attention, I want to reorder. So reorder the expression in the parentheses. So now that's going to be x minus 3 over -1. And you might want to just pause and see if you can write this out for yourself. So if I reorder this, now this becomes x minus 3, right? So if I flip-flop the order here, the x will come first, so I don't have to write that plus sign anymore, and then the -3 comes last. So this is now reordered. And now you can see that we can actually simplify. So what that means then is I can cancel out these x minus 3's. So what am I left with? Well, my final answer then is going to be 1 over -1. So this whole thing will just actually equal -1. So a few notes here. So when we canceled these out, so remember, when you're canceling things out with a fraction, this never becomes 0. You can't cancel things out with a fraction and magically get a 0. You can get a 1 though. So when you cancel these things out, you have to have a placeholder on top. You have to have something here because we've canceled everything else. So when I canceled everything else, that left me with a 1, and then here in the bottom, so when I canceled this out, I still had that -1 here. So that's how I got to that. And then I just rewrote this expression as this whole thing will just equal -1. So this is the trick that we want to do. And we want to play around with, and we want to get really good at this. But this trick can kind of mess with people's heads a little bit. So what I want to do is I want to kind of show you this one more time, and then I want to help you get used to playing around with this. So one other note here, what is this trick actually called? So this is something that you do somewhat frequently with a lot of rational expressions. So this is what's known as the multiplicative property of -1. Sometimes it's called that, but it doesn't have to be called that. I've seen other books actually just refer to the property itself. So I've seen some books write this out. So I've seen some books try to write this out. I think that this is kind of confusing too. So the personal name that I use for this, which is incredibly formal, is I call this the -1 trick. Specifically, I call it the -1 trick for rational expressions, although I'm not being totally honest with you. If you were sitting in one of my classes, what I actually call this is the -1 thing. So that name is even less precise. But the reason I like to call it this is, so if you think of it like this, you totally kind of know what you're referring to. So some people call it the -1 trick or the -1 thing. So it's kind of hard to describe everything that we just did in this last step. But if you kind of have some sort of shorthand name to remind yourself of what you were actually doing, that'll hopefully kind of trigger how to do all those other complicated steps. So, like I said, I want to show you one more example of this. So here is another example, and I want to simplify this together with you before I kind of show you some of the nuances and help you kind of work through this. So for this particular expression, we need to simplify. So notice actually I can simplify the bottom, right? Or I can actually factor something out. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to factor out that 3. So this is going to become 5 minus x over 3 times x minus 5. Now notice that I have the same thing on top and on bottom. And so you may have been wondering, does it matter where you factor the -1 out of? So if I go back to this example, did I have to factor out -1 from the bottom? Could I have done it in the top? It doesn't matter where you decide to do this. I just like x to come first, so that's the reason why I make the choices that I do, but it doesn't actually matter how you decide to do this. So like I said, I personally prefer to have x come first. So what I want to do now is I want to factor out the -1 on top here. And I know now that that -1 trick, the whole point of it is to help me rewrite this so that I can make this cancellation. So let's go through the precise steps of this one more time, just so that you kind of get why this works. It's really important to understand why this works. So I factor out -1 from the top, and so then what's that going to change the top to? -5 plus x. And so now I've got that over this. And so now what I want to do is I want to reorder this part here. So this will become now -1 times x minus 5 over 3 times x minus 5. Now I can go ahead and I can cancel these out. So in this case, my answer is going to be -1/3. So this is not just necessarily going to give you -1. This could give you a number. So this is why I kind of like thinking through these details. And one thing I would really suggest is if you're kind of getting the idea behind this, force yourself to write some sentences. What did I do here? 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 Taking some time to kind of give yourself that extra investment, it's going to help your brain kind of churn through these details versus just you kind of mindlessly repeating a bunch of steps. So this is something that I think is really helpful for understanding. Okay, so now let's practice a skill that we need for this. So we need to practice the skill of factoring out -1 and then reordering the expression. So I'm going to show you kind of the long way to do this, but then I'm going to show you what our goal is, what our eventual goal is. So first, let me write out the long way. So this would be the way that I've been showing you so far. So first I factor out -1, then I reorder. So this is kind of the long way of doing things, and this is what I'm asking you to do in this exercise. But where I want to go with this, I want to actually do kind of a shorthand way. So the reason I write out all of this detail is I want you to know why I did this. If you just think of math as a set of just repetitive steps that you just do for no reason whatsoever, that doesn't really help you like math. Like nobody wants to just do things, right? Because it's just, I don't know, I just wave my hand and it happens. That's not a good way to really do things. But if you understand kind of here's, the kind of the methodology, here's why we did this, then you can employ and start using a shorthand, and you'll understand why we have that shorthand. So the way that I would actually do this is the whole reason that I factor out -1 is because I know that I want to reorder this. So I actually just want to cut out kind of this step. I want to cut out this step, and I just want to go straight to this step. So what I know is this is kind of what's happening here. And basically, in a shorthand perspective, if I factor out -1, then I just can take for granted that I can just flip the order of this expression here. So I factor out -1, I flip the order, and that's actually all I want you to do. So this is the way that I want you to practice the next two exercises. So pause the video here and reorder these kind of using that shorthand. If you need to go back and review some of these steps, go ahead and do that. So this can be a little bit tricky, so you just want to take your time and really understand this. Okay, so now I'm going to do all of this just using that shorthand method that I just showed you. So basically now I factor out -1 and then I just flip the order. That's it. If I do that again over here, -1, and then I flip the order. So we want to just have kind of this skill in the back of our heads as we are moving towards rational expressions. So the whole point of this is that sometimes you have to use this trick with simplifying rational expressions. So here's an example that we'll do together. So I'm looking at this. So let's say I'm just going about my business. I'm trying to simplify this. So I'm going to simplify by first factoring out 6 out of the top. So that's going to leave me with 6 times x minus 2. And then in the bottom, I've got this 2 minus x. And then I see, oh, I've got this and this. Oh, I can't cancel them out. Now I know I have to do the -1 trick. So maybe just for fun, I will factor a -1 out of the top here just to show you that it doesn't matter where you factor out the -1. So if I factor out -1 from this, it's going to make this +6 now into a -6. So I'm going to rewrite the top now with this negative, and then I'm just going to flip this. And now I can go ahead and cancel those out. And so I've got -6 over 1, but you wouldn't write it like that. We would just write it in this case as just plain old -6. Now, if this were reversed, you had 1 on top over -6, then you have to leave it as a fraction, but as it is here, we can just write this as -6. Okay, so this is kind of the thing that I want you to do. So go ahead and factor out your negative wherever you want, top or bottom, and then go ahead and cancel it out and kind of see what you're left with. So I have these exercises here. So go ahead and try, you can do it however you want. If you want to try all 4, try all 4. If you want to just do one at a time, but go ahead and pause and try some of these and then we'll check them together. Okay, so here's B. So let's see. First things first, I need to factor 4 out of the top. So that's going to give me x minus 5. And then out of the bottom, I'm going to factor out 6x, and that's going to leave me with 5 minus x. Okay, so there's a couple of things that I can actually simplify here. I'm going to have to simplify the 4 over the 6x, but let's just do one thing at a time. So you want to try to make sure you're not overwhelming yourself when you're working on these. So first things first, I'm going to rewrite the bottom, and I'm going to flip the order here. So this now will be, I'm not going to do anything to the top. And then I'm going to rewrite this now as -6 so that I can flip the order here. And again, it doesn't matter if you wanted to write this with the negative on top or on bottom. And I'll make one other note about this in a second. So now I can go ahead and cancel these out. So now I'm left with 4 over -6x, which can simplify to 2 over -3x. Now, one other note about this, sometimes people get hung up about the fact that there's a negative here and they say, well, what if I had the negative on top? So just in general, so this is a fact. So if I have -a over b, that is the same as, a over -b, and that is the same as -a over b. So these 3 things are the same. So it doesn't really matter where that negative goes. Ultimately, what it means is that the entire value of the fraction is negative. So if I want to rewrite this then as -2 over 3x, that's really the same. So that's just something to kind of think about and just kind of note. Okay, so moving on to this one. So now I've got x minus 2 and x plus 2 on top because I'm going to have to factor that. And then this is going to be 2 minus x. Now I've got to factor out a negative from somewhere. I'm going to factor out the negative from the bottom. If you did it from the top, as you know, it doesn't matter. So let's see. I'm going to factor out a -1 here, and I'm going to write this as x minus 2. You can write this as -1, or you can just write this as a negative. It doesn't matter. And then cross those out. So now I get that this is x plus 2 over -1. There's several ways you could write this. So you could leave it like this. You could write it like this, or you could write it like this. So they're all equivalent. It just depends on what, the homework or the teacher or whoever is looking for. Okay, so moving on to this one. So be careful when you factor this. This is 36 minus x squared, right? It's not x squared minus 36. So this is a different order. And just like if you look at the last one, right? So in this one, x squared came first. And so when x comes first, when you're factoring this out, x will come first also in the factoring. Now, notice I have flipped, right? So now x comes second here. So x needs to come second in the factoring. So take a second and make sure that that makes sense to you. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and factor this. So this is going to be 6 minus x and 6 plus x. So make sure you have your order here right. And now you can go ahead and factor out the -1. Cancel out your x minus 6's. So remember, you've got to have a 1 as a placeholder on top. And then you can just write it like this. Okay, great. So continuing on. So now I need to factor the bottom here. So I've got 5 minus x over x minus 5 times x minus 2. I can see that I'm going to have to factor out -1. So let's see, I will factor it out from the top this time. So now I've got x minus 5 and x minus 2. Cancel those out, and now I get -1 over x minus 2. Okay, so at this point, that's kind of the idea behind this. And it's kind of up to you where you want to go now. Some people really struggle with this, so I have a lot more examples just going through this idea in this video. If you feel good, then you can just stop here. Otherwise, if you feel like you need to do a few more examples, I have a lot of examples in this video, so I'm just going to keep plowing through them. So once again, if you feel like you need to practice this a little bit more, pause here, go ahead and try these, and then hit play when you're ready. Okay, so for this one, so let's see, this is going to factor as x minus 5 times x minus 5, and then this is going to be over 5 minus x times 5 plus x. Okay, now once again, be careful with that, right? So the number came first with this one, so that would mean that the x has to come second in the factorization. Okay, so now I can see that I need to factor out -1 probably from here. So if I were to write all of this out, so I've still got x minus 5 times x minus 5 over negative x minus 5, and then 5 plus x. So cancel those out, and so now you get negative x minus 5 over 5 plus x, and you can't really go any farther with that. Now notice where I put the negative in this case. I put the negative here in the middle. Alternatively, I could have written this as x minus 5 over negative 5 plus x. So that would totally work. Okay, so moving on to the next one. So now I've got 27 minus x cubed over x squared minus 5x plus 6. So just a reminder, this is the formula. We're going to use the difference of cubes. I will go ahead and write out that formula for you real quick in case you forgot it. So I have other videos showing you how to actually use this formula if this is totally foreign to you, but this would be the formula that you're going to use to kind of crack the factoring on this. So I'm going to go ahead and use this. Okay, so there's how that factors. So now you can see I've got this 3 minus x and this x minus 3. So now I need to do the -1 trick on one of these two factors. And so now I can go ahead and cancel out my x minus 3's to get. And again, there's several different ways you could kind of write this answer, but this is kind of the idea behind this, and then it's up to you to kind of think about the equivalent forms of this answer. Okay. Moving on to this one. So for this one, this is slightly trickier factoring. So here you're going to want to use grouping for this. Again, if you don't remember how to use grouping, I do have videos just showing how that works. I'll go ahead and link that video, both of those videos at the end of this, this lesson. So let's go ahead now and just use grouping here. So what do the first two terms have in common? Well, they both have an x squared in common. And then the second two terms both have a 5 in common. And in the bottom, I can factor out a 3. And so now let's just finish the grouping on top. So the way that this would factor on top, this will factor as x squared plus 5, and then times x minus 3 over 3 times 2 minus x. So this one, so you can't actually go any farther with this one. So I guess I actually made a little bit of a boo-boo with this one. So I meant for this to be 3 minus x. You can't go any farther with this one. You can't force this to do what we need it to do. So this one's kind of a trick question. So this one's actually already simplified. Good practice for you, even though I may have put a little Easter egg in there. Oops, sorry. Okay, so now what I have here are 3 more examples. So if you still feel like you're kind of struggling with this, go ahead and try these 3 examples, and then we'll go through them together. Okay, so for this one, so on top I'm going to factor out 9, and then in the bottom this will factor as x minus 6 and x plus 6. And so now I can do the -1 trick, so I'll rewrite this as -9 times x minus 6 over x minus 6 and x plus 6, and then I can cancel those out. So my final answer here will be -9 over x plus 6. Okay. Moving on, so let's go ahead and factor this. So again, this is going to use that same difference of cubes formula, so I'm not going to restate it. So factoring everything out, we'll get and so now I need to do the -1 trick. And so now I can cancel, and so my final answer will be okay. So last one. So this now is going to use the difference of cubes on top and the difference of squares on bottom. So to show you how this factors, we'll have and so now you can see that we need to do the -1 trick with this y minus x and this x minus y, so I'll do it on top. And so now my final answer will be okay. So hopefully that's enough examples to kind of get you through everything. So if you have any questions, you can comment with questions, and I'll read them over, and if I have time, I might make response videos, or I might respond to them. And if you found this helpful, like this video, share this channel, and feel free to subscribe. And I guess now I'm going to try a new catchphrase here. All right, guys, go forth and divide and conquer.